everyone, welcome back to the workshop, and today looking at something a little bit different. Look at a lot of lasers, done some CNC machines, even some traditional woodworking here on this channel. And if you go way back to my other hobby of model airplanes, but in the middle of that, I have dabbled around with some 3D printing. And so while I haven't highlighted a lot of it on this channel, occasionally I use a part here and there, but I thought we'd take a look at some of the newer printers out there. And as luck would have it, I was sent the QIDI X Plus 3. This is one of the newer high-speed printers that is out there. And so I thought, what a great way to jump back into 3D printing. So if this is something you're interested in, stay tuned. We're gonna jump right into it. So first and foremost, this printer was sent to me for this review by QIDI. However, they're not sponsoring this video. They're not paying me to say anything. This is just sent to me for an honest review. And so let that weigh as it will with my opinion and how you take it. But I am going to give you my honest opinion from my experience with this. 3D printing isn't something I'm necessarily as knowledgeable in, say, as lasers or CNC routers, but I have been working with them for quite a while, going way back to some of the laser cut printer bots and such, and then working a lot with the Ender series of printers. But what interested me about this one is a few things, and let's go over the specs and I'll tell you which ones really have me excited. All right, so this is the middle of their line in this X series, and it has a build volume of 280 by 280 by 270 millimeters cubed. So that's a pretty decent size and step up from some of the other printers out there. And they do tout that it has printing speeds up to 600 millimeters a second. My old printers would often be running around 60 to 70 for PLA and such. And so that's a huge jump. More on that a little bit later, but any increase in speed when talking about 3D printing is going to be welcomed, as the time from hitting print to getting your part in the past has been quite a while, and sometimes overnight prints and such. This is a Core XY structure that runs on Clipper, which is a lot of techno babble for new comers, but it gives a lot of insight, a lot of back-end tuning, a lot of the structure, the way the printer moves around. That is what is being used to gain those higher speeds. And one of the things I really like is that it has a high-speed direct drive extruder. That means the extruder is right at the top near the nozzle. There's no length between the extruder stepper motor and the actual extruder itself, so allows it a much more fine control over that filament. Now the internals, it does have an all metal frame and then has this outer plastic shell, which is important. The high speeds, you do need a pretty stout device. This is not necessarily light by any means. It is pretty hefty, a little bit to move around. And then being enclosed with this plastic shell does allow for some other features we'll get to in a little bit. Now, this one does come with two hot end options. By default, it's installed with a copper hot end, and that's going to give us some really good thermal conductivity. However, when you're using more abrasive materials such as carbon fiber infused material, they also provide a hardened steel extruder end and hot end for use with those materials. If you use the copper one, it's going to just kind of scrape away at those, and you're going to lose the quality and actually the ability to print after a while. The extruders do have a maximum printing temp of 350 degrees Celsius, so getting very high up into those, allowing for some of those more difficult extrusions and filaments to be used. Along with that, they do have a heated bed that heats up to 100 degrees Celsius, and then also a heated chamber that has a circulation fan that will heat up the interior of this cabinet. Again, we've got that plastic shell enclosure. It'll bring those temps up to about 65 degrees Celsius as well. Those things all help out with initial layer adhesion to your bed, as well as preventing warping and adhesion on the parts as it goes. So certain filaments, it likes to be warmer. So when you're getting into your APS, sometimes your PETG, they definitely want to have that extra heating to kind of keep them sticking together while the print is done. Whereas things like PLA, they're liking to be cooled faster. So another thing that's built into this is it has resonance compensation. As you get this printer set up and going, it does run through kind of a resonance test to find those frequencies that will cause issues with vibrations and such. And so it does do a bit to try to compensate that. One of the biggest features I'm loving in newer printers, and this one definitely has it, is auto bed leveling through, and this one does it through adaptive meshing. So it has an inductive sensor and it goes around and hits various key points on the bed, checking the distance between them, and then it adds that into its calculations for when it's running the bottom layer and then subsequent layers after that. With that, it also has a PEI build plate, makes for really good adhesion, has a little bit of a texture to it, helps grab onto that, but then it also pops out of the printer and you can kind of flex it to help pop loose your prints as well. And then driving it all, getting your prints ready, it does have what's called the QIDI slicer, which is based on Prusa slicer. It was a very well proven slicer in the hobby, and it's included at no extra cost. There are paid softwares you can get that get more detailed into things such as, you know, modifying your individual build supports, things like that. But as someone getting started into it, this QIDI slicer is very nice. Along with the clipper features in there, it gives you a lot of real-time information you can look at while the prints are going. So those are all the details of the printer. There's some more technical ones if you really want to dig into it. I will, of course, have links down below where you can look into all that, but those were kind of some of the key ones. Now let's jump into some of the tests I ran, what we were able to print with this machine. So the 3D printer really comes basically all assembled. It's well packed in a large cardboard box. As a matter of fact, I strongly recommend you maybe get some help moving it onto a table, maybe out of the box. But there are things packed inside of it, and you'll want to take it out and actually you'll plug it in and turn it on fairly quickly, and then they start walking you through the various steps of what they need you to do to get the printer ready. So there are some very heavy duty zip ties that are holding things in place. There are some zip ties around the extruder and such holding that in place. And then there are in fact also some screws holding the Z-axis down. So you need to remove all of those, and then it will walk through lifting the build plate up, and then there's some foam to remove, all those things. But it steps you through on the screen doing that. Once it's done with that, it starts, the one thing that is manual is you need to do an initial Z-height calibration. They give you a small piece of paper to put in between the build plate and the nozzle and just adjust your Z-height to where that is just snug. Mine was within maybe 1/10 of a millimeter. It really didn't need a lot of adjustment. And from there, it will start working through its initial bed meshing and then through the resonance testing, which is gonna sound pretty crazy. It starts with a low tone and just starts ramping up, creating some vibrations and doing some measurements so that it knows where those resonant frequencies are that it needs to avoid. So eventually it will get done, and you do need to install the filament spool holder and such on the back. And that brings me to one of my few complaints about this printer is where the filament loads on. So let me get this turned around and I'll show you what I mean. They do have this fairly sealed filament spool holder, kind of like a dry box. They do actually have a desiccant pack that you can install there, and they have your tubing going all the way up to the extruder, which is great, but it's on the back here, and while that's nice and out of the way while the printer is working, having to change this out, if you don't have this in a fairly open area where you can walk around to it, if you have to move this printer, that's gonna be just a little bit of a pain. It would be great to see it maybe on the side, but you know, due to the nature of the printer, it does need to be a bit hefty. It does need to be able to stay stationary, so it can't be a lightweight device. Having this on the back just means that you're gonna need to think about where you put this to make sure you can still access this and be able to switch your filament out. While we have it back here, we'll just show that it does have your typical computer printer style 3-prong adapter for power. They have a switch. And they do have a wired network port. Now this printer can be put on your network and is actually the best to be put on your network, either wired or wireless. And that's how the software can address it quickly and easily. And you can do live monitoring that way. You can upload files and then you can still load them through, there's a USB port on the top back here, but using it through the software and through the network is really the way to go. They did include an initial 500-gram roll of filament to get you started, which is nice. It's more than just printing out a small little trinket. It allows you to do a few prints on that, and that is their PLA Rapido filament. I went ahead and also purchased some PETG, another roll of PLA Rapido, as well as their ABS. All of my tests in this video were using their filament. I'm going to follow this up testing out a few other more budget filaments. That being said, these rolls of 1 kilogram were all between $23 and $28, so not terrible, and generally goes a fairly long way in printing items out. But just keep that in mind that they have their own filament, they have their own profiles for that filament. It works well, and that is what I used in this review. One of the things I do like about this printer is it does have a fairly responsive touch display that allows you to get through the menus. So you can bring up any of your loaded files that you've maybe gone through the software and loaded onto the printer. You can address some basic controls, so you can do incremental adjustments to move your bed and your gantry around. You can also do a load and unload of the filament. There is a calibration for auto bed leveling and a Z offset and such, and then you can go in and check your network settings. In addition to that, you can change your language, and then there's on the front you have some basic things such as you can turn the light on and off. There's a stop button, and then it just gives you some very basic information about what the status of the bed is. So temperatures of your nozzle, your bed, and the chamber, as well as the Cortex A53, the processor, as well as the 1.5 gigahertz. Not really critical information to have on the front screen, but nice to have. And then when you do load in a file, it will display some of the initial information on it. So if we come down here to, I believe we had a benchy in here somewhere. There we go. It will give you a preview on the screen of it. It'll say what the filament it is set up for. It will also tell you approximate time, as well as the amount of filament it expects to use for this. So just some basic information about the job. Nice to have that in there, and a little preview of the file as well. All right, so let's take a look at what I was actually able to make with this printer. First things you ever want to print are usually some sample products that are pre-sliced for it, or calibration cubes. And so I did a couple of both. And if you're familiar with 3D printing, you'll know what this is. This is called a benchy, and it is a little boat that actually has about every single type of print and scenario that you will run into it. So it's got text on the bottom, it's got overhangs of various sorts, it has openings in the middle, it has tall ones with arches, it has squares, it has everything. So you can kind of take a look at the model and see what your printer is going to do. Now on my older FDM printers like this, I would print one of these out and it would take over an hour to finish. So being the first thing I threw into this printer, I was very pleasantly surprised to see this thing crank this out in 17 minutes and actually at a fairly decent quality. The layer lines are all pretty good. There's just a little bit of maybe under and over extrusion in some small areas. And there are a few spots with the overhangs that, you know, they start showing just a little roughness there. But considering this was run at, I believe, just a standard quality and at a high speed, I was very impressed with the performance of this printer. So right off the bat, I was feeling pretty good. But this was a pre-sliced item, really tuned for this printer and this filament. So then I switched over to a calibration cube, and of course this was still using the initial 500 gram roll of filament, so it was all black. And this is just basically a 1-inch cube, and it prints out XYZ, so you can kind of see the different patterns, see if you're getting any ghosting, any under or over extrusion. And again, this one looks very well. There's just a little bit of ghosting on some of the sections, but all the letters are very crisp in each of the axes, and the corners are good, and it came out, you know, measuring as it should. So then I also followed that up with some Lego calibration cubes. So these are very similar. They just add some openings on the bottom and then your Lego style pegs on the top. And again, just seeing some minor ghosting. This is using the default settings that are used with this, the QIDI slicer, as well as the rapid PLA that profile that they provide for this. So all my tests initially were looking very good, and so I thought, well, let's look for something a little more challenging. And so I was able to download this object. This is basically a jar with a screw-on lid, and did this again with the rapid PLA. And looking at this, it came out very well. The top and bottom, the adhesion layers are very smooth. And then our threads, again, they also came out very smooth on both objects. The only spot where I had a little bit of issue is on the bottom of this one. You'll kind of just maybe be able to see just a little bit of extrusion problems there. And so after this, all I did was, I think I tweaked the bed settings just a little bit, bumped them up just a little bit, and maybe the hot end just a little bit as well. And the only imperfection that you'll notice here is kind of the seam line where it stops and starts. Now you could set in the slicer to randomize that, and that would help take it out. But for a quick print of the stock settings, like I mentioned, this fits perfectly. It snugs down. The two parts line up. You almost can't tell that there's no like ridge or anything there. There's just that fine line of the intersection of the two parts. So all in all, very happy with the performance. So while I still had some filament to go through, I thought I would try something that was a little more useful to me. And went ahead and found this file. Now this is multiple parts. This is actually a 4-inch duct, basically a ball valve for 4-inch ducting. And so you print both of these halves individually, and then in the middle, you'll see as I turn this, you've got that whole kind of ball valve effect that opens or closes this. So that's printed separately, and then you have your handle in this. This top and this bottom, or these two halves, those took about 4 hours each. The ball took about 5 hours, and then maybe about half hour to print off the lever and the bushing on that side. So really, time-wise, might seem like a long time if you haven't done these before, but considering the large size of this and the quality, I mean, the finish on that, just nice and smooth, very few ghosting lines on this one. Again, we just kind of have our start and stop seam there, if you can see it right there. But here's a functional part that I could put in line for my exhaust ducting on some of my lasers, or dust collection and such. Gonna have to give that a try. Now I wouldn't put this right at the end of the laser per se. I'd want to put it downstream a little bit, most likely, just to make sure that everything's cooled off before it hits this, because PLA does have a lower melting point than some of the other plastics. But a plausible actual hardware piece that this printer was able to make, and considering the speed, I was pretty impressed with this. You don't have to be an expert at CAD and 3D modeling to be able to print things out with this. A lot of the items here are things that I actually just found online, and so I went ahead and switched out to some PETG and played around with making some things like this. Was a downloaded 3-piece puzzle. If I can get it to kind of start coming apart, there you see these will eventually all fall apart, and then you got to figure out how to put them back together. But again, that worked pretty well. You of course can find cool little things such as this little catapult, that if you want to be able to launch small objects across the room, you can do that. But sticking with being more useful, one of the things I like to do is print out these honeycomb pegs using a 3D printer. So they print, this would be on the bed leveling part, and then they print up from there, and then they just kind of fit into the honeycomb weave. And you can scale these for your various honeycombs. So within that software, you could adjust the size and the height of everything to dial them in for you. So definitely something that's very useful. You can just make more of these. Same thing with my CNC routers. You can kind of make some of your clamping mechanisms so that they're consumable. You run through it, the plastic's gonna wear away, but it's not the end of the world. So definitely something that it would be useful in workshop to be able to print out little jigs and little things like this. Now, one of the dangers of adding a new tool to your workshop is your family and significant other are gonna find excuses for things that you should make for them, which is not lost on my wife. She has a love of photography and actually works with a lot of older film cameras. However, some of these have various size bodies, and if you're into photography at all, you may be familiar with things called camera grips. Well, she was able to find this file for her camera here, and then I was able to print it out. I used PETG on this one, and just again the stock settings, and this was able to line up on bottom, and then all I have to do is take a nylon screw, and then I can bolt this on here to the bottom, holding it in place to the camera body, And now she has a nice camera grip, gives it a better feel on there. So, you know, it's not just things to help with our tools in the workshop, but things that we can add to other equipment and gear, jigs and adapters like this. That again, this really only took just a little over an hour to print out. It came out very well. The bottom has, of course, the texture from the PEI bed, and then the rest of it just has kind of the smooth layer lines to it. So interesting things you can find online. People share their files all the time. You don't need to be an expert at 3D modeling to be able to utilize a 3D printer. Now, of course, we're just getting past Halloween here as I'm doing this review, and I thought what a perfect time to print out a few other things with that as well. And so this was actually a file I found online. It is a little posable skeleton where the parts print individually and then you kind of snap them into place. Now, I did print this out on regular PLA, which in hindsight, I probably should have gone with the PETG. PLA gets to be a little bit brittle, and as they are snapping into these joints, a couple of them did end up a little more loose than I'd like, but this was pretty cool. It did take a little bit longer to print out all of these parts, but again, they all came out smoothly. I was able to remove any of the support material and had kind of a cool desk piece for the holiday season. And then, of course, no Halloween trick-or-treat experiences complete without having a skull decoration bowl with candy in it. And so we were able to print this out and use this while handing out candy to all the kids coming by in the neighborhood. But again, you know, the detail in this is very smooth. You got a lot of little ridges and bumps within this. And the only areas where I start seeing some imperfections are on these deep overhangs here. You'll see just a little bit of where the extrusion just didn't quite want to adhere to each other, but you know, you could play around with settings, you can play around with your supports to dial that in. But for this being more of just a decorative fun piece, I wasn't overly worried with the fine details of it, just needed to kind of hold the part. But as is, you know, it's actually really good. I've been very impressed with the quality of this printer, printing at these higher speeds. Now, of course, the one filament I haven't had a lot of success with my other printers because they're open frame and needed enclosure has been ABS. Well, this one has its enclosed, the plastic shell encasement. It has that chamber heating element and the circulation fan in there to keep the temperature more stable in there. And so I did run some ABS. And so here we have just another test cube that I ran, and this shows some writing. It's got the various measurements, it's got your XYZ, and it has a little bit of an overhang there. And I just ran the stock ABS rapid settings on this one for their filament, and didn't change a thing, and it actually came out pretty well. So knowing that, I wanted to try, again, something a little more useful for us. So some of you may have an X-Tool laser, and you know that they have, for their rotary, they provide risers, and they are these screw-on aluminum feet that go onto the base of the laser. Well, someone went ahead and modeled up 3D printable ones. They have threads both on the bottom and the top, and so as you can see here, on the stock X-Tool feet, they screw right in and will give you that elevation. And I would imagine the little rubber caps that go into the base of these would fit right into there since they have the same threads. So instead of having to spend the money on these, if you needed some extra height, you would definitely be able to print these out. I was able to print a set of 4 of them out in about an hour, and they came out very well. I had to use just some build plate support, so on this bottom part to support that, but that popped right out. And then the threads are working very well. They're threading right into these aluminum ends without any issue. They tighten down and they're very solid. They don't move around. So definitely a more useful item. You never have too many clamps, correct? Well, this is another print that I found online, and this is what's called a print in place. So even though it has some moving parts, so this moves this way, has these little jaws on the end that move, this is all printed in one piece. There's no assembly afterwards. You just kind of snap a few parts loose and it works. And you know, you've got a little clamp. Sometimes having a number of these smaller clamps is useful, and yeah, you could probably go buy a set. But hey, if you've got a 3D printer, it's fun to be able to make things for you. And the nice thing with this is it's scalable. I scaled this file up to 200% and it still worked. You could make them smaller. You could possibly make them a little bit bigger based on the build plate of this one. But just another example of how this machine can provide you with some usefulness in a wood shop outside of just making tchotchkes for your family. All right, so those are all of the things I have tested with this. Like I mentioned, these were all using the stock settings for the slicer and their specific QIDI PLA and PETG and ABS filaments. I do plan to follow this up using some more generic and budget-minded filaments to see how it performs and see if we have to change some settings from there. A couple things I want to address about this printer. I mentioned it earlier, the spool filament being in the back, that's probably been my biggest frustration with this. And when I say frustration, it's just I have to make sure that I set it in a location that I can kind of get at the printer from the side and be able to load that in there. You definitely wouldn't want to tuck this all the way into an area to where you cannot access that back, because you need to get at that filament. That being said, I think I've seen a few online people sharing their ideas for kind of an aftermarket side-mounted item, and a lot of times they're just sharing the files to print them out. So it's really kind of a minor inconvenience. Just would have been nice to see that design have a little better placement initially. This is a heavy printer. You're not going to be moving around a lot. You're going to want to find a place that this can set and stay. I've heard a few other reviewers talk about the noise of this printer, and when it's running, the fans do spin up, things are moving around. Yeah, it's going to make some noise. You're not going to want to have this running in the same room that you're trying to work from home from, or your kids are trying to study in. You're going to want to kind of have it maybe off somewhere where it can be doing its thing and you can be monitoring it passively, but that it's not going to be disruptive to others. When it's sitting here like this, I've got it on. As you can see, I'll touch the screen, that lights up. There is a fan that runs. Some people have complained about this being really loud. To me, it's really nothing. It's just a very low hum. I don't know if there's something different about mine from others. I know some have complained that it's a very loud howl. To me, just sitting here idle, it's not a big thing. So I often leave the printer on. It goes kind of into a standby mode, but that means that when I'm going to send something from the slicer in my office, the printer's on, ready to accept that, and it's pretty slick. The other thing that I would love to have seen in this printer is a built-in camera. Now, the software does actually allow you to add a webcam, and I did plug one in to test that and had it sitting on top. Looking through this glass, it gets a little distorted, which brings me to kind of my other complaint, is that the plastic is nice, it allows good views, but some of the key areas where you need to look, they have kind of these curves and it gets just a little distorted. So that crucial first layer is sometimes hard to see, and it would be nice if maybe those would have been just offset by even ½ inch, I think would have made a difference. But then also having a camera built into it would have been nice. You can add one, and I plan to do that in a little bit, put one actually in the case. I just need to find a good location for it, figure out the best mounting method, and we'll definitely follow up with how that works in the future. Now, would I recommend this as a beginner printer? Well, perhaps. I mean, it's hard for me to say that because I have had so much experience with older printers. This seems so much easier to me. So using the stock slicer settings with their recommended filament, I really didn't have any issues with it. You know, that's for me, I was okay with the quality. You may have higher standards, but I was honestly impressed with the speed and honestly impressed with the quality of the prints. Comparing them to my older printers, this was just a breeze and wonderful to use because it was so fast and the quality was there without me doing a lot of tinkering. The biggest thing that's going to help you out is having a printer like this that has that auto bed leveling. Getting that first layer down is crucial. Once it goes from there, it's just tweaking your settings to get the finish as good as you like. So I think it would work for a beginner. It's not the cheapest printer out there, but the features that you get with this, you're gonna grow into it and not feel like you have to replace this printer very quickly. All right, so that's where I'm gonna leave this video here. As I mentioned, it might not be as in depth to all the technical details of this printer. This is more of a video for as someone working with lasers and a wood shop. Do I feel this would be a great addition, or is it something that I recommend to a newcomer to 3D printing? And I think across the board, for the price point, yes. It's going to be a lot of high-end features without quite that high-end price you have in other printers. So I've had great success with it. I hope that you would too. And so if you are interested in this printer, I will have some links down below where you can purchase it. If you're watching this video right away, We're coming up on the end of 2023. They do have a sale on this printer right now. There is a code down below that'll get you a really nice price on this printer, so definitely check that out. They also have a larger version of this as well as a smaller version. I'll have links down those below as well that you can check out. Some of these links will be affiliate links. They do give a small kickback to me, but as always, no pressure. Just trying to pass on some information where I think it might be helpful. All right, well, I'm going to wrap this up here. I hope you found this informational. And if you have any questions about this or anything else in my workshop, go ahead and leave a comment down below and I will try to get back to those as quickly as I can. It's not the last you're going to see this printer. I'm going to be playing around with it more and I'll be incorporating other things into it. So hopefully we will get some more 3D printing content on this channel to help you decide if it's something you want to do or help you along the path as well. Once again, I thank you for checking out this video and I hope you will stick around and check out what I have coming out in the future. But in the meantime, I hope you can get out into your workshop and make something too. We'll catch you next time.